Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Kentucky is an abandoned hospital that is now infamously known as one of the most haunted places in America. And it's not hard to see why. The place was a death factory where thousands upon thousands of people died and were buried in unmarked graves. Some reports say as many as 6,000 people died there. It's said that over 75% of the people admitted to Waverly Hills Sanatorium never made it out alive. But before we dive into this story, remember to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Now, back to Waverly Hills. A sanatorium is a medical facility that specializes in treating tuberculosis, and Waverly Hills was opened in 1910 to treat tuberculosis patients, which is a disease that affects the lungs and is spread through the air when people cough or sneeze. Back in the early 1900s, there wasn't much that doctors could do to combat tuberculosis other than let the patient rest in bed and hope for the best. So basically, if you went to Waverly Hills, you weren't going home again. Not only were the doctors that ran the place completely incompetent, but they were also insanely greedy, which meant that they crammed way too many patients into the building, and all the patients had to share beds. So if you managed to survive at Waverly Hills, chances are you would leave with something else to take home other than your health. You'd be taking home tuberculosis. In 1926, Waverly Hills was shut down because of all the horrific conditions and all the deaths that happened there. And in 1938, the place was finally closed for good. Today, paranormal investigators from all around the country travel to Waverly Hills to investigate the ghost stories that surround the place. But before we hear those stories, here's a quick history lesson on the origins of Waverly Hills. Waverly Hills was originally built in 1910 as a private sanitarium for tuberculosis patients. It was founded by two doctors, Dr. Edward J. Barksdale and Dr. William J. O'Connor. Originally, the cost to stay at Waverly Hills was $30 per week, but as time went on, the cost increased to $50 per week. That may not sound like much, but keep in mind, this was back in the early 1900s when the average worker only made about $3.27 per hour. So $50 per week was an insane amount of money. Even today, $50 a week is a lot of money for most people. Anyways, the sanitarium quickly became overcrowded and understaffed, and conditions were terrible. In 1926, the state of Kentucky began investigating the facility after receiving numerous complaints from patients and their families. The investigation revealed horrific conditions. Patients were lying in hallways, staff members were stealing patients' belongings, and there was a general lack of sanitation and hygiene. The state of Kentucky then shut down Waverly Hills. In 1938, a new owner bought the facility and turned it into a private home for the elderly. The new owner, Mary Jane Creathorne, wanted to make a fresh start for the facility, and she believed that it could be used as a home for the elderly. However, the home only lasted a few years, and in 1946, it was sold again. This time, it was purchased by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Louisville and reopened as a tuberculosis hospital. The hospital remained open until 1961. During its time as a TB hospital, it was known as the Louisville Chest Hospital. The hospital was notorious for its high mortality rate, and many patients died within its walls. In 1961, the hospital was finally closed due to the introduction of effective antibiotics for the treatment of tuberculosis. In the following decades, Waverly Hills was rumored to be haunted, and many people reported strange experiences in and around the building. Throughout the years, there have been many attempts to revitalize the property, but all of them have failed due to the belief that it is haunted. Now, let's jump into the scary ghost stories that surround Waverly Hills. One day, while paranormal investigators were walking through Waverly Hills, they noticed what appeared to be a shadow of a person standing in the corner of a room. At first, they thought it was just a trick of the light, but as they watched, the shadow began to move around. It seemed to be pacing back and forth as if someone was walking behind them. When they turned their cameras toward the corner, they saw what looked like a man in a hat. He was wearing a long coat, and his face was obscured by the darkness. The investigators tried to communicate with the entity, but it did not respond. It simply continued to pace back and forth. The investigators were able to capture images of the entity before it vanished. The photo showed a dark, shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. The investigators believe that this was the ghost of a former patient who died in the sanatorium. Another team of paranormal investigators was exploring the basement of Waverly Hills when they heard a blood-curdling scream. The investigators were not in the basement alone. There was another group of tourists visiting the sanatorium. The investigators stopped what they were doing and listened. The scream came again, louder this time. It sounded like a woman's voice, and it was filled with terror. The investigators tried to identify the source of the scream, but they could not find anything. They checked all of the rooms in the basement, but everything was empty. As they were leaving the basement, they heard the scream again. This time, it was close behind them. They turned around and saw a dark, shadowy figure standing in the doorway. The investigators tried to communicate with the entity, but it did not respond. It simply stood there, motionless. The investigators were able to capture images of the entity before it vanished. The photo showed a dark, shadowy figure standing in the doorway. The investigators believe that this was the ghost of a patient who died in the sanatorium. And lastly, let's talk about the creeper. The creeper is perhaps the most famous ghost that is said to haunt Waverly Hills. It is said that the creeper is the spirit of a former employee who worked at the sanatorium. The creepers are seen as a dark, shadowy figure that crawls around the walls and ceilings of the building. Witnesses have described the creepers as being about 5 feet tall and having long, sharp claws. It is said that the creepers can be heard scratching and crawling around in the walls and ceilings, especially at night. Some visitors have even reported seeing the creepers moving from room to room, seemingly searching for something. The creepers are believed to be the spirits of patients and employees who died at the sanatorium. They are said to be restless and angry, and they are looking for a way to escape the building. Many paranormal investigators have attempted to capture the creepers on camera, but so far no one has been successful. However, there are many photos and videos of the creepers that have surfaced online. These images are said to show the creepers moving around in the walls and ceilings, as well as interacting with people. One of the most famous videos of the creepers shows a group of people exploring the sanatorium. As they are walking through a hallway, they hear a loud scratching noise coming from the ceiling. They stop and look up and see a dark, shadowy figure crawling around in the vents. The figure seems to be watching them, and it makes a motion as if it is trying to get their attention. The people in the group try to communicate with the entity, but it does not respond. It simply continues to crawl around in the vents. The video ends before anything else can happen. So there you have it, 3 scary ghost stories from Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Kentucky. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our other videos on the most haunted places in America. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching.